But welcome to everyone who is joining us today for our August Academy, slightly postponed, but we had a real opportunity in postponing it. Thank you all for your patience with my own personal challenges this August, but it was great that we were able to set this up for Native American Heritage Month so that we could have a special guest speaker. And part of our whole exploration and working on the Land Acknowledgement Task Force was digging back into a little bit into this history of Indians in Minnesota that the League of Women Voters was involved with, and going, gosh, what is it with this book? And where did this come from? And how did this all come together? So we found some very interesting intersections that are really fun to start with, that really tie us into, again, the reality that our quest for diversity, equity, and inclusion is a lifelong one, right? It's a journey we've been on for decades, and one we continue on today. We continue to learn and get better at our advocacy as well. And so I'm just really thrilled. We're going to start a little backwards because of timing, but with our special guest, Kathy Graves. Kathy, you want to wave there? There's Kathy. And before we get started with Kathy, I wanted to quickly show you all a little bit our new website, and she is going to be referring to some of the things about the Indians in Minnesota book. So I'm going to give you just a little quick preview into this, and then we'll let Kathy talk about her participation in the latest edition and fill us in a bit. And then we'll come back after that, because I know she has has another engagement at 5. But really quick, we are launching also today a new web page, and it is our diversity, equity, and inclusion web page, which is under Where We Stand, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And what we have there are sort of 4 main areas, and like all of our web pages, they can grow and expand, and we can add things as we all grow and expand as well. But we have our DEI policy on here. We have the DEI resource list. We'll come back to that we had on member resources. And we have our Indigenous land acknowledgement, which we're excited to talk about. We also have a little clicky here on Indians in Minnesota. And it is really interesting to see that we had in 1963, one of our state studies that was actually, we even have on our webpage here, the original handwritten note from Mrs. Ralph Ebbett, or Liz Ebbett of LWV White Bear Lake, who voted to move coordination of a study of Minnesota Indian citizens with an emphasis on areas of welfare, education, and economic opportunity in 1961, which then became this printed edition, which is, I believe, now in its 5th edition and still sold under the University of Minnesota Press. And we still get royalty checks for it, which at first when we got these checks, I had no idea where they came from. So, so it's exciting we really want to hear a little bit more about this book. And I really caught Kathy just last week, and she was so kind to pop in. So Kathy, if you want to let us know a little bit more about this book and your participation in it, we'd appreciate it.
Good. All right. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join this call. I came to this project in a very odd way. The Elizabeth Ebbett, amazing human being. Many of you probably knew her, and she was an amazing person and wrote the first 4 editions. And then she was quite ill, and I think she literally turned in the manuscript, like her daughter said, and died shortly after. I mean, she was just working on this thing till the minute she died, which is a reflection of her passion for the subject. It kind of lingered, and then it languished, and it went to somebody else who started editing it and also died. And I was like, felt like, I don't know if I want to take this project on. It felt a little cursed. But I did, and it was a really big project. It was a very, Elizabeth had to do a very big rewrite of it. There'd been 4 editions, but major changes in tribal sovereignty and gambling had made big changes. And then the census came out in 2000. And so it really needed a big overhaul. So that's what this edition is, the 5th edition. And I ended up forming a committee of some really wonderful people, and who became the advisors for this book, because obviously I'm not Native and I'm a writer, but I depended on them. It was Larry Aiken, Sally Hunter, Tony Looking Elk, who I still worked with to this day, Laura Waterman Whitstock, and Don Weedle. And those 5 human beings were amazing partners. I also had this great group of leaguers Carol Frisch, Janet Gendler, Judy Rosenblatt, Sally Sawyer, and Marion Watson, and Bridget Parento, my business partner, who helped me too. But the 5 Native advisors, I'd finish a chapter, I'd send them things, I'd send them the whole manuscript, we'd go back and forth, and they spent a lot of time with me. And I have this one very funny memory that Tony Looking Elk, who now works for the Bush Foundation, I was having a really hard time with the first chapter. It just didn't feel right. And I took him to lunch, and I was talking, and Tony's a very quiet, stately person. And finally he said, I think chapter 5 is chapter 1. And I was like, dang, that's right. That's what it was. And it was this really great shift. And that's the kind of work they did. They gave like really broad input, and then really precise input of, intricacies of Native law, et cetera. But we interviewed dozens of people. We did tons of research. We worked a lot with the University of Minnesota Press to get it to the point where we were able to publish, and had a great photographer who I actually had met. My husband's done a lot of legal work for the White Earth Land Recovery Project, and I met a photographer who took these beautiful photos on White Earth. And it was published, I think, in 2007, 2008. I can't even remember. And we've had quite a few, I've talked to lots of different groups. I've talked to lots of different people who have used it. Foundations have used it quite a bit as reference, and tribes in different ways. It's been used as textbook in classrooms. So I don't really know all the ways. Michelle probably knows more from the royalty checks where it gets used, but it was a labor of love. And I'm glad to hear there's royalty checks from it going to the league, because it was a really, really big project, but a really, really important one too. And so that's kind of the background on it. If you've ever look through it, there's a lot of data that's obviously the sources, you can still look at where we got the sources and go and update it, Google it. But it really it's a very holistic book, and I credit Liz Ebbett for that, because it's starting at the really broad, and what are the tribes that share the geographic region we call Minnesota, all the governmental relationships, tribal sovereignty, state and local relations, natural resources, economic development, gaming, education, health, everything. So it was a very, very holistic kind of look at Indians in Minnesota. Like I said, when it came out, I think the league we did quite a bit of speaking on it. Some of the people on the committee talked about it. And I just think it's been a really great thing for the league to have, it would have never happened if it wouldn't have been for Liz's passion for Native people. That's what drove all of this. So I was really grateful to her family for, really helping her get it to the finish line. And then we had to she'd written a lot, and we had to cut back because she had so many notes and so much research. She could have written 2 editions of this book. So I don't know if any of you knew her, but I hope you did, some of you, because she really was an extraordinary person. So while I get writing credit because we had to rewrite parts of the book after languished away, I really do give her credit for being the brainchild of this, and to the League for making it possible, because before this was written, there really hasn't been anything written holistically about Indians in Minnesota. So I'm happy to take any more questions or answer any questions you have, or anything you want to know.
Thanks, Kathy. If people have questions, if you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand. I can't see all of you on the screen, so if you have the little hand feature, that would be helpful. What I did get a couple questions submitted to me before, but one of them really was I think the question was the response from the Native community. I know that in looking at it, there were, really almost 2,000 interviews over the course of the various editions. There were videos taken. It was really very much a League document, right? Which was really meant to document their life, right? Not to necessarily have a point of view, but this is who our Native people are.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your experience with working with the Native people and their response to the book.
Yeah, it was a League project in every respect. This was not like a couple people. This was like, dozens and dozens and dozens. And then going back and updating, some people had died between editions. We had to find new tribal leaders, tribal government change. So it was lots and lots and lots of interviews. So in that respect, it was deeply steeped in the voices of the Native people. That's what we wanted to be, is that vessel for those voices, not to put a point of view on it, but really to tell the whole story, because, I feel like now Native issues are so much more at the forefront. But in the early 2000s, tribal sovereignty was like, I just don't think that, and we still have a long way to go as white people to understand what this is. But, even land acknowledgement statements, that's a relatively new thing for most organizations. So the Native people, I would say, especially the 5 people, but the 5 people then would give me other people to talk to. So they were like the conduits too for, so when we had a luncheon when the book was published, and it was great because we had a lot of Native people attend and just thank the League for, making this happen, because sometimes somebody had to put some resources forward for this. And even though the University of Minnesota Press, they're great and everything, but they didn't give money towards it. I mean, the League had to make it happen. They were willing to publish it, but it was done through the resources of the League of Women Voters. So.
Thanks, Kathy. Another question that came up is, how do you feel we can or should carry the spirit of this study forward into the future? Such a great
question. I've thought about this a lot since I talked to another group about a month ago of Leaguers. What's the best thing? I mean, do we have books anymore? I mean, we have books, but should we update this? Is there a reason to? I guess my biggest answer, I would take this back to the Native community and say, do you think is this worthwhile? Do we still need it in this age of Google and internet searches and stuff? Is it worthwhile? Would it be worth updating? And then I would say what we would, if it's so, that kind of forming an advisory committee would be a really helpful thing to talk about. But I think it would be a really, an interesting thing to talk to, people who teach Native studies, Native organizations, if it's something that that's worth updating, and if it's helpful. I think it would be a really good question.
Great. Thank you.
It's getting old. It's 2000, it's almost 2023. So it's like, it's like, wow, time goes fast. Yeah.
Right. And a lot has happened in those 15, 16 years. That's for sure.
Somebody asked me directly in the chat, it's Indians in Minnesota. That's exactly the title of it. So if you Google it, University of Minnesota Press, Indians in Minnesota, you'll see that.
and we have a link to it on our new webpage that we'll walk through. You can buy it direct from, from the University of Minnesota Press, but also the original study. We have downloaded the entire original book, the original study
Neat.
from 63. So you can also download that. And it's just really exciting to capture the story. But I think the commitment we have now to say, just as you're saying, how do we move this forward? What can we do to make this, either make this resource more available, more robust, more accurate, or where are we at with the times, right? So
yeah, I think where are we at with the times, and what do people really need?
Great. Any other questions from anybody about this? We do have many editions. If anyone's interested in the book, please email me and I can give you a copy. When I started, there were boxes of these books and I really had no idea where they came from or what was happening. And so it's really been fun to sort of put this together. You realize how quickly our past can be forgotten without documenting it. So we're also really wanting to keep this legacy alive, as well as we work into now how to do better by our Native people. So
yeah, I think there's certain things that are so like boarding schools. There's some in here, obviously, but so much updating on that, and so much repatriate. I worked with a woman through the Bush Foundation. And repatriation of artifacts, that belong to the Native people, that need to be, that's a whole nother part that is getting to be a really big issue. So those are the kind of things you wonder, how do we update? So
great. Jane, your great group. Oh, there's Barb. Yay, to talk about. You guys have your microphone off. So if you could turn your microphone on.
I'm so excited about this. I don't know, Michelle, if you remember that I was in my church library and I was early for Sunday school and I looked over and there's Indians in Minnesota and I lifted it up and they said, oh, that's Liz Ebbett and her husband, Ralph, who are both gone, were charter members of our church. And we have a current member, Mary Santee, who is not on this DEI committee, but she went with Liz in a van with the audio visual equipment and they drove around and did some of the original interviews. But when I raised the book in my Sunday school class, oh, Liz, she's just phenomenal. And so there's a living connection to White Bear Lake.
Yeah, and we put that on the webpage too. So thanks for sharing that, Barb, that great story, and Mary. So we are very excited about that. That is really great. Well, any other questions before we let Kathy go, and then I can back up a little bit. Yeah, Shelley.
Kathy, this has been a real treat. I'm on the board at this time, and I'm the DEI chair currently. And I'm the one who, with Michelle, put together a task force that drew up the Land Acknowledgement Statement.
good for you.
And one of the things that we talked about and didn't come to any conclusion was, what do we call this group of Indigenous people? Because there's American Indian, Native American, Indigenous, Native peoples. I have found it differs, to which Indigenous person you're talking to, or which, and it's Chippewa, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, when you were doing all your interviews, what was that piece? Oh
my gosh, that's such a great question, because it really is. Everybody, sometimes it was Native Americans and then American Indians. And, it was, Liz had written a little note. Everybody uses different language, which is pretty true. Everybody used a little bit of different term, and especially just knowing, there's Dakota people, there's Anishinaabe, when, Ojibwe, people, everybody, used different language. So it is something you kind of have to agree, you as an organization have to agree on. I think, Indigenous people is a really broad swath. So, I'm not sure there's really one answer that's correct at this point, but certainly the land acknowledgement statements need to reflect sort of, I think the best ones they've talked, Native people have told me are the ones that really don't just say Indigenous people, they talk about your land, that you understand what land you're standing on. And that's been a really important thing to do. And I think you guys did that, didn't you, in your land acknowledgement? The land of the Dakota or something, yeah.
Yeah, I think, and we'll talk a little bit about that too as we go through the site. I think that was a big piece that came through when we were even working on the Land Acknowledgement Task Force, that, just all people are different. And the idea is to get to know all of us and our differences, right? Alice Mormon is asking, do we have any Indigenous women who are LWV members? And we often, most all of us know that the majority of us in the League of Women Voters are older white women. But we also don't do a survey, right? We don't ask our members to tell us who they are and where they're from and what their backgrounds are. And so that is something, we've talked about. There's sort of that notion of a lot of times I find there's more diversity than we think, not just by how people look and on the outside, but where everyone is coming from and their experiences. So it's something for us to talk about too, is how do we best talk about our people, and how, for certainly what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time today is how do we basically reach more people who don't look like us. That's my simple way, is how do I be in a room with people who look less like me? And there's lots of those people. Oop, we've got somebody sharing their screen. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. So and yes, Ellen, I love your suggestion of giving one book to each league chapter. I think that is a great idea, and I'm excited for us to explore what's next. And I wrote down Tony's name at the Bush Foundation. Kathy,
He's so awesome. He's just an awesome human being. He's also, one of the things like that, the league, I don't know how this all fits together, but one of the things that I've been working on at the Bush Foundation is the Bush Foundation issued social bonds last year, which is a fancy term for, they took on debt and they issued $100 million in social bonds, which is a pretty gutsy thing for a foundation to do. And they split that into two equal pots of money, $50 million that is going to Black community members and $50 million that is going to Native American Indians. And in the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the tribal lands that share that geography. And basically what they're going to do, which is really unusual, the American Indian group called Indian Collective, NDN Collective, they're out of Rapid City, and they are shepherding the grant, so to speak, and they are going to give away individual grants because people who've had their land taken from them and people who were enslaved have these, generational lack of wealth building opportunities. When you don't start with any land of your own, you don't have a home of your own, or your wages were given to your master. You can find these direct through lines to wealth building. And so what they want to do is give opportunities, grants not loans, grants for wealth building opportunities for American Indian people. But they aren't calling it reparations, but reparative action. And so this might be something the league wants to look at in the whole world of DEI. What does it mean to take reparative action? So I think it's a really interesting thing that's coming up, like for all of us who read Ta-Nehisi Coates, when the case for reparations, it seemed like a far out scheme. And now we're talking a lot about that. And I think we're going to hear a lot about that from Native people. There's all kinds of different things going on. There's an organization called Friends of the Falls, which was looking at the falls, the St. Anthony Falls, and they wanted to build something. And the Native people said that's a sacred land. And so then they've restarted that project, and they're talking about this really cool project with Native people there. So there are all kinds of interesting things that are going on that are percolating. I think it's a really exciting time for Native people. So.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. I want to honor your time, and I really appreciate it. And I may be back in touch for some of those contacts as we go. So thank you
All
again
right.
so much.
You
for
are
being
so
with us
welcome.
today.
Thank you for
Okay.
inviting me. All
You
right.
bet. Bye-bye.
Take good care.
So yeah, I want to just share my screen again and go back to our page here. I was so glad that Barb spoke up, Barb Memory, but I do have the reflections here, some of the reflections and that were shared. Barb, you shared with me these by Liz's daughter, Allison, about Liz Ebbett and her past and why she was so passionate about Native Americans, and also the quote from Mary Santee of driving around with a car full of video equipment. So, and it really is, I think is really exciting to see that and remember that everything starts so much, all of our advocacy starts from that study, right? From studies. By learning, we grow, we get better, and we're able to advocate. So that's a kind of a small piece, but a really interesting piece of history that I don't want us to lose as we look to the fact that the League has been involved in a lot of these things over time. The other pieces that we have on our website, and we'll talk, we'll kind of go backwards and stay in the space right now of Native peoples, and then we'll kind of end in the broad space of DEI. But was the Indigenous land acknowledgement. So as Shelley mentioned, Shelley pulled together a task force of people. And from there, we came up with this Indigenous land acknowledgement for the State League. And we, on the same page, we have several pieces that we'll talk about. The first one is, and I stole from and referenced them, but this wonderful map of where our tribes are here in Minnesota, but also and through the wonderful Minnesota Indian Affairs Council really talks about what is a reservation, what is a tribe, and then we have a link to all of the tribes here in Minnesota. So this is a really nice way, number one, to figure out, gee, who's around me? Where might I make a connection with any of these nations? So all of the nations are here, and it's a wonderful kind of grounding, I think, for where we can make connections. So when you look also at the sorry for all the scrolling here, but when we talk about the Indigenous land acknowledgement, and is that we really got to this point of really trying to figure out how then do we help local leagues develop their own. And so there are new resources. These resources all come from the Native Governance Center. We're very fortunate to have this very strong program based here in Minneapolis, but they have a really nice set of resources about acknowledgements, how to do them, and this is the whole thing, tips for creating an Indigenous land acknowledgement statement. So there's lots of ways for you all in your local leagues to use these resources to take ours that are and adapt it to yours or start from scratch. But it was really fun to look at, and fun is probably the wrong word, instructive, helpful, humbling actually is the word. Just what was fun was the learning about the things we don't think about when we're doing it. So the process of putting a land acknowledgement is just as important as the final result, right? And so we really looked at this point here, use appropriate language, don't sugarcoat the past, use terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, stolen land, forced removal. And this is hard stuff, right? When we were coming up with our land acknowledgement, it felt those are really hard words, but we ended up using them. We spent a lot of time on the right words to use for us. And we, but you'll see here, we say these include reprehensible actions such as annihilation, forced assimilation, broken treaties, destruction of culture, separation of families, and other attempts at dehumanization of Native people. So, Shelley, did you want to say a little bit too more about, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about and name the people who are on the task force and just reflect a little bit about the process we used to help get to this point? And turn on your microphone there, Shelley.
Thank you. We had a wonderful group of people, and I don't want to skip anyone. I don't think I'm going to. Barb Memory, you're on the call. Meg Litz from Duluth, so you Duluth people would recognize her. Carol Moen, Park Rapids. Nikki Kohler from Bloomington. Anne Fleming. Michelle, help me. Do you know what?
Yeah, so Anne Fleming from you had from Red Wing.
Yeah, Red Wing. Alyssa from Cannon Falls, Northfield. I don't have her last name, and I feel bad about that. But that was our group, and then of course myself and Michelle. And the first thing we did is we had some homework that site that Michelle just brought up, and a couple of other places we before we met at all just studied that. And then we came together, and each one of us said what we thought was the most important thing that needed to be included. And right now I'll say what a couple things that came with that question was that a statement needs to be followed by action. And that though it might not be those actions listed when one presents the statement, but that that they need to be concrete actions that the member league or the group that's creating the statement, that we felt that very strongly it was empty words. It was just pro forma. Oh yes, nonprofits in particular are doing these. No, we felt that, and so I want to pass that on. It's also then an opportunity to look at relationships and build relationships with Native people, Native communities. We then put one of our members put together a rough draft so that we had something to start digging at, and just had a wonderful session looking at that strong language. Michelle, that was just so important. And then the other thing that was so important is that we would be a good ally, that we are not telling their stories by doing this land acknowledgement statement. We are honoring that's the whole point, their land, and didn't want to either not realize it or come off as that we're now, that we could tell their story, say what they need, call them whoever they are. And so that was another piece that was important. But eventually we presented it, and I think we were proud of what we put together and proud of the work that we did as a committee. So that's a little bit of that piece, Michelle.
Thank you very much. And I put up again our our final piece here, and this gets to that part at the end. We hold ourselves accountable to redress these harms through truth telling, including acknowledging our complicity in these harms, And we pledge to defend the right of self-governance of our sovereign tribes and to uphold the rights of Indigenous citizens within our democracy. And so we are, one of our first steps really was what we're doing now, continuing to pull people in and to help support local leagues to themselves learn about Native peoples, to look at the possibility of doing land acknowledgements. And we're really looking at how we will, as a state league, and hold ourselves accountable. So the first step of it is this webpage. We wanted to get resources out there. We really wanted to give you these guides to help develop Indigenous statements. We also wanted to just get better educated, right, about who our Native peoples are, who our tribes are, and do a better job of helping people learn. We also have, really great opportunities to learn right around us. So if our home Native Minnesotans, which is at the History Center, we talked about maybe doing some field trips. Of course, winter's coming now, but we talked about trying to do one of the sacred site tours and doing touring Fort Snelling. So we look forward to us doing some additional outreach to help with education. And so I'm going to go back here. So many things we can do. And when we get to that beyond land acknowledgement, these are some of the things we were looking at. And as Kathy was talking about, how can we support Indigenous organizations? Things like commit to returning land. Could we be part of the conversation about reparations? Where do we want, where should we be in this space? And that's something we're actively looking at as a board right now. So any questions on any of that so far? And then we'll conclude a bit with looking into DEI as a whole. I want to point out too, as we go forward with this, I'm going to use an example when we go to the resources here. Oh, Gay, you had a question or comment? Yeah.
I do. I was wondering if there's any thought about the action piece of joining with groups such as the group that's trying to change the paintings at the legislature, to be accurate portrayal of the Native population, that we would join in, a coalition or even financially support that, or back any kind of legislation that would be needed, for something like that. I think that I'd like to see an action piece that was maybe every year, that all leagues could be a part of.
Yes, I love that idea. I think that's just fabulous, Gay. Does anybody else have any top line thoughts like that they want to share? I know that as we learn more, we find different ways and that we can participate. So let's keep that conversation going about what we might do. We are definitely committed to taking action this year. Catherine, Rassley, and Jane. Go ahead, Catherine. Oh, I lost her.
Thank you all very much. So when we reviewed our land acknowledgement that was written particularly for our league, I think it was, I don't even know how to describe it, but I think people were a little taken aback, right? Like, I think as we learned here, the point is to push ourselves to address what really happened. And I think not all people are like ready for that right away, so like, how do you start the conversation so that people can be more open to having a real direct land acknowledgement statement? Does my question make sense?
Yes, we had some of that in our own process, right, Shelley? And I think a couple of things, and one is, I think it was when we had some of these conversations, we realized we needed a little more help. And so the Native Governance Center, what's nice is they also have some videos on their site that we link to kind of learn about how to have those conversations. You know, I think to the extent that you could involve someone from a Native community in your conversation is good too. But we also know that one of the conversations we had with Carol Moan and with Park Rapids is this is our work to do. So, you know, there's that feeling a lot of times where we definitely want input and participation from Native people. At the same time, the point was, but this is your work to do. So what we did was sort of do our work, have our conversations, deal with our issues, and then brought it for reflection and comment. So that worked fairly well. I think, Catherine, one of the things is using the guide like I was showing you to, or another guide that talks about when you get something from something like the Native Governance Center that's saying it's appropriate to use the right words. It kind of gives you, it's not about you personally. It's not about like for Shelley, it's like Shelley and I think we should use these big words. It's about this is what the Native people are saying we should do. And giving some space for that, right? It's really tough stuff. I think the other thing is our committee met, I mean, it was over 4 or 5 months, was it not, Shelley? I mean, we met on Zoom, there would be drafts, we would have conversations, there would be time for people to process, to reflect, to be mad, to be like, I think that's ridiculous. We're not taking, you know, I mean, we had some moments, right? It was good moments. It's our work to do. But I think it's that notion of embracing the journey, that a lot of this work is not just to get to the end of the line, because we don't ever get there, right? It's the journey we're on is to have these conversations. And I just want to quickly say, I often will talk about, and I hope it's always all right, Rebecca Hawthorne, if I use your example in ways that at Plymouth, but the work you did around racial covenants, you know, a lot of it was when you discovered in your community, wow, we have all of these racial covenants, this on our property. It starts with acknowledging, wow, there's something going on here. And then you start having the conversations, you start taking things forward, you start weaving in more people, and things start to happen, but it isn't fast, right? Like you start with no idea of where the end is in mind. And I think it's taking that one action. And so I think as you're working with your own leagues, give yourself the time, use Indigenous sources for how to do this, and probably get agreement on that. Let's say, okay, we're going to talk about big words because, you know, big things happen. You know, I sort of, you know, I don't want to trivialize it, but it's sort of like talking to kids, you know, about how babies are born. You know, use the words. We have words here, people. Let's use them, right? And it's really important to say it correctly, but let's look to how Native people are telling us how we should do that. So I hope that helps. Jane, and then Ellen.
Thanks, Michelle. So my dad, I'm going to take you back to my family history, but my father graduated from the U of M Medical School in 1943. And he accepted, because he was interested in Native people, he accepted a job as the only physician in all of Monoman County, which encompassed the White Earth Indian Reservation prior to any kind of Indian health agreements. And this is part of my giving back DNA. But as I've gone through or worked with medical students at the U of M, one of the things they tell me is that white people can't always assume that the experiences of one Native American equal the experience of all. And so I think we have to kind of remind ourselves that we may have Native people who participate with us in various ways, but you know, Ojibwe from White Earth is not the same as a Navajo from Arizona, and we can't equate the same. I would like us to pick an issue that is tantamount to the survival of tribes, to the flourishing of tribes. And as a nurse and a psychologist, I see that in the healthcare sphere, that we've created circumstances where Native people have diabetes because of what we fed them, which is the kind of systemic genocide to give them lard and flour and cheese, and that was it from commodities. I think we have to think about education, because more Native kids leave our school systems than any other population of people. And so I would like to see the League focus on an issue that we can lobby for. I mean, I do believe in the land acknowledgement statements, but as you research it, you find out they're different for every single tribe. I mean, tribes in the Southwest were hanged, people were rounded up and shot. People in northern Minnesota were kind of forced into the tules in the woods and made to stay there. You know, every tribe has a different history. And I think we need to acknowledge that as well. And then try to figure out how, as a league, we can have the greatest impact on the lives of Native people in our state. I mean, what are the needs as defined by Native people? That's my soapbox.
Thank you, Jane. Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, I think Jane kind of makes the point that I was going to say is we're not all in the same place here, knowledge-wise, commitment, but we have to find, because we work on consensus, we have to find a way. And I think I think what you said, Michelle, about time, I know our league feels a real pressure to get something written because we've been talking about it for almost 3 years, but it's important to bring people with you. And I think this book is an amazing beginning for people. You know, I look at, I've been involved with Holocaust education, and you have to get people to understand why it's an issue before you can get them to understand why they should care and why they should act. And it isn't only because you feel like you want to right or wrong, it's feeling that you can, I think Jane said, make a difference is important. A few years ago, do you remember the white privilege posters, billboards that went up all over Duluth without any kind of explanation or anybody knowing why they were up there or what was going on, or and it was a disaster, but it was with good intention. And you know, I think we were about 10 years ahead of our time, but I think we need to do this right and bring people to where, you know, from where they are to where we would like them to be, and then have the input and take the time that it takes to do it properly, or because otherwise it's just something that's going to disappear like that book did for 30 years, right. You know, so that's my soapbox.
Yes. Well, and I think everything we're talking about, thank you, Ellen and Jean, and everything we talk about really connects to all of DEI, right? It is really about being with, we look first at our communities, who's in our community, what's our situation, where can we have an impact where we are and where we live, and that is central to league work, right? Is the communities we're in is where we can do our work. So there's things we could do at the state level, but that shouldn't be what defines what all local leagues can do. I was with LWV Red Wing, for example, and they are making great inroads with Prairie Island. That makes great sense. They're right there. We're here together, right? There are things for local leagues that just make sense. And I think because so many of us are so educated, we get into how to do it all right. There's no right way. It's pick up the phone, make a call. You know, we have links to all 11 tribal councils. Anyone could call any tribal council and say, I care, I'm concerned. What can I do? These are things we can, you know, any of us can do. So I think that's the same thing, whether we're working in a community with Somalis or Hmong or anybody, other people that look different than us, where we aren't exactly sure what we're supposed to do or how to do it. We just need to start having those conversations and be prepared for learning. On the action front, and before we end, I want to just show you a couple more things, but I do want to say on the action front, and thank you for some of the ideas that are coming in. One of the things that, an example is with the Enbridge Line 3 and the aquifer breach. We are taking a strong stand within our state advocacy, and we're involved with the Native American communities who've been doing amazing research on the profound damage to the aquifers that is continuing because of the breach. So that is one thing we are doing and will be a big part of our advocacy, because we feel, again, where can we be successful as the league? And certainly working with our DNR and with MPCA to say, listen, we have to hold people accountable to follow through and protect our environment when we've given industry a place to come through here. It's really bad faith right now, what's happening. But I like some of these other ideas too. So let's keep them coming. On the state level, we'd love to reach back out and really encourage local leagues too to define what this might look like for them. So on this resource list, there's many, many things here. And sometimes it feels like, well, there's just so many things. How do we start? I really wanna emphasize that part of just start anywhere. But the importance of time, as Ellen was saying, bringing people along, having the conversations. This is not this is ongoing work that will continue. But I really, I continue to use and lift up, if you look at no other resource today for Indigenous peoples, look at that Native governance website, but the DEI values slideshow that LWVUS did in 2021 is still really, really outstanding as a tool for those of you looking at how to bring DEI to life in your local leagues. Really looking through this, there is a link to the direct, also on our website, to their actual presentation. But using the lens, this is what we talk about. And I think this is still exactly what it is. Who should be involved in the process of, in our case, of democracy? Who's missing at the table? Or for our local leagues, who's going to be impacted by the work we do? And I especially, I will stop my scrolling here. I know it's, but I love this right here. Key questions, this diverse community partnerships and practice. What voices different from ours should we engage to inform our vision? What success looks like. So identifying and talking with a range of communities to inform our goals. So an example would be, you have Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove. I don't know if any of you are on this call, but we have, if you looked at the election results, again, we have some of the really diverse new candidates who won their races, and including in Brooklyn Park, we have the largest Liberian community in the country living in Brooklyn Park. So that would be an example. If you're if you're Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove, you'd go, wow, we have what voices are different than ours that are here in our community that we can work with? What could that look like? How might threats and opportunities look different in different communities? When you look at, again, how does unfair redistricting impact these communities? We have a lot of examples. While our maps overall did some great things, we certainly have areas where maps are really hurting various communities. Who will be impacted and how, whose participation is needed. And so I just really want to encourage you to, again, really devour these upper set of resources. US put a lot into it. You really can't beat a lot of the great stuff they've done. In addition, we continue to have all these great books, but the irony was we didn't even have our own book of Indians in Minnesota on the list, but it's one we need to add. Even for a study, looking at some of these videos and just finding one to say, you know what, let's watch one of these videos and then let's talk about it as a local league. There is so much here that you could work with. So on the one hand, you could look at a lot of these things and go, oh my goodness, this is a lot. But what I hope is what you'll see is there's a lot to pick from, is to pick a thing, pick a person, pick a group, find something you want to do. It would be great if we could all commit to coming back here in a year. I'm going to pull the list of who's here today, and we're going to all come back, and I'm going to invite you and say, what did we do? What if each one of us, we have 32 people on this call. When you start thinking about it, and I think we have 35 leagues, what if we each did just one thing? We reached out to one person different than us. We did a webinar. We brought up an issue, signed on to legislation that really helped bring health equity to Native American communities, et cetera. I bet if we all committed to one thing and we all agreed to come back here next year, I might even set the Zoom up. Can you set it up a year and a half? And I'll invite you all. I bet it would be amazing, because you see what happens. It's easy to get stuck in all of the headiness of this. But it's really time to just start taking some action, learning from it. I love what Sandra Graham Mason saying, to just comment, 3 levels of LWV makes this work. And it is a real gift we have, being part of an organization where we do have some really strong advocates looking nationally that can give us perspective, and the state to be able to advocate on legislative issues, and all of you in the local communities who know best who your people are and where we can make a difference. So it's a lot to absorb in 1 hour, but any questions? Did anybody come in with a burning question about this that they haven't gotten answered yet? I'm here to do my best. So any questions before we part ways today? Or examples? Did anybody have any success? Maybe we could leave with a success or two, because I know some of you are doing great work. Any success that people want to share in how they're bringing DEI to life in their local leagues? Well, Judy Zaumbrecher from Minneapolis.
The one, we worked with making voting a tradition this year to register Native American voters. They have a wonderful program set up in terms of knowing their community, and bringing people in. And then we were kind of the subject matter experts on how to register people to vote. Plus, we had lots of great volunteers. I think we did 5 or 6 events. Probably registered about 85 voters who were mostly Native American in the Minneapolis area. Jolene Jones, who heads up the Making Voting a Tradition program here in Minneapolis, spoke to the Minneapolis League back in October about what she is doing. And we just found it a really wonderful partnership. And part of by interacting and being in that community, I certainly learned a lot about some of the questions and issues that they had about, such as people saying, why should I vote when the government has violated all the treaties they've signed with us? Mm-hmm. The other one is the Supreme Court heard the case, I think it's called ICWA, around the placement of Native American children into foster homes, where they're to go into foster homes, hearing people talk about how they were taken from their family. So it was really, I found it very enlightening for myself to hear that. And we are hopeful that next year, we can continue the partnership with Making Voting a Tradition, because I think they thought it was successful also. And by the way, we got the connection through Patrice Kunish, who's Mary's sister. And Patrice is also a member of the league here in Minneapolis.
Great. Sandra Grand Mason.
We have a very active DEI committee in Duluth, Minnesota, as you know. But we are having a holiday social for the first time. We're getting together in person. And it's just a mixer. It's just for the members to get together, to reconnect, to meet new members, to have some fun. And we are having some free giveaways. And this is how you can just work DEI into anything. Three of the giveaways are gift certificates to BIPOC upstart businesses in Duluth with information about them. So it's, there are ways you can just kind of work it in. They're little things, but they all help.
Yes, very good. And another comment that was made about the land acknowledgements, which I think is really very good idea, is, you know what, it's ink, people. It's not even ink anymore. It's digital. It can change. You can come up with a land acknowledgement. I find if you just call it draft for like a full year, then no one feels, but I mean, seriously, don't get, the, whatever that quote is, right? The perfect get in the way of the common good here. We, give it a shot. I think it's a great way simply for all of us to have a land acknowledgement, also to define its use. We have yet to do that still, sort of in the Zoom world. We've sort of like, when do we say it? When do we use it? Those are questions we're still addressing, but I think that conversation is just a really good starting place, because it does open up some of the doors that are a little more scary sometimes, but it gets you all on the same page of where we are literally being on the same land with people that we need to honor and better understand. And so anyway, I hope this is helpful to me. Anytime we talk about it, I know we keep learning and growing, and I am going to put this date, which is November 15th of 2023. We're going to get back together. I'm going to invite you all and see what happened. So please always feel free to reach out to us. Shelley's done a great job. We'll probably turn our task force into a greater DEI committee as we move into the new year to learn how we can bring it into better life. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.